Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Livin' That DMV Life from Van Meter Homes. I'm Ernie Kiger. Today, I'll begin with this quote from the late Leah Jana. Talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. Race relations, fairness, and equality have been on the minds of millions of Americans this year, while at the same time we find ourselves dealing with the pandemic and all the challenges that go with that. The Van Meter companies are just one of many thousands of companies around the country that has decided to tackle the issues of equality and fairness straight on by creating a Diversity and Inclusion Council. Today, we'll be speaking with Anum Pervaiz, a real estate counsel and Van Meter in-house attorney. Anum, thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely, Ernie. Thanks for having me.
Well, Anum, we have seen many companies in this year of 2020 all around the country begin initiatives such as diversity and inclusion. Is there a story behind the Van Meter Company's initiative?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. You know, for Van Meter, the success of our company has everything to do with our core values, and we strongly believe that. And at the cornerstone of those core values is diversity and inclusion. So it really kind of made sense for all these conversations that were happening in the company about diversity and inclusion that really kind of have been happening, that this catalyst over the summer to sort of start centralizing and prioritizing those conversations in a D&I council, a D&I initiative whose a primary purpose is to centralize the conversations and see what kind of momentum we can get and changes we can implement to sort of transform our company, transform the industry, and transform our communities.
Are there specific goals of the D&I committee, and what is the intended effect on the Van Meter companies as a whole?
Yeah, it's a good question. What we're looking into for the D&I Council is really any way that we can improve the positions of different people from different perspectives, right? That's people from different backgrounds, different religions, different races, different classes, different disabilities, and how we can advance them within our company, what we can do for our community, how can we improve recruiting practices, where can we sort of add some value and help transform the construction industry in general to sort of start tackling these issues and thinking about how we can best support all these different groups and all our different employees, really, and thinking about how we can start fostering that sense of belonging, right? That sense of belonging within our company and that sense of belonging in the industry and in the country as a whole, really.
The country as a whole has have had a lot of common experiences this year, and it seems that different peoples in different places with different backgrounds react to these in any number of different ways, even though the experiences may appear to be common. And a lot of D&I councils were probably created as a result of some of these things. What kind of challenges are we facing at Van Meter Homes in regards to the D&I council?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say really kind of the biggest challenge for us, Arnie, has been that we've got an incredible amount of support and we've got so much that we want to look into that it's kind of been, well, what do we prioritize, right? It's almost when you start looking at the universe of what could be improved that you start seeing all these different areas and you got to start somewhere. And so I think that there is a lot of passion to sort of start tackling things, but lining up those dominoes in a way that kind of makes sense. Within the D&I Council, we've started taking, preliminary looks at, what does the vendor makeup look like? What can we do in our community? What can we do in recruiting? What can we do in advancement? What can we do in just sort of fostering this overall sense of inclusion, right? Thinking outside of just diversity, but how can everyone really feel like they belong? And that is a much harder problem sometimes to tackle. And diversity is one very big, important step towards that, but it's not necessarily sufficient on its own, right? I mean, everyone needs to feel like they belong. And how do you do that? And then how do you do that remotely, right? That's another. We're not all in the offices, and when we are, we're kind of spread out, and we want to make sure that everyone kind of feels like they're being heard, they're being acknowledged, and they feel empowered to speak up. And so that's kind of been probably going to be one of our biggest challenges as we start thinking about what we want to do, what sort of initiatives could help that.
It is such a bewildering process, and I do mean process. If I could relate a personal story, one that I believe you've heard before. I grew up in this area back in the 1950s and the 1960s, and there was an amusement park we all loved to go to. I could still sing for you the radio jingle of Glen Echo Amusement Park. Fun is where you find it. Where do you find it? Glen Echo, that's where you find it. It wasn't until about 20 years ago when Jim Vance of Channel 4 did a story on Glen Echo Amusement Park where he told us all that it was a segregated amusement park. I had no idea, none at all. But people of color were simply not allowed in the amusement park at all. And I'm thinking, my goodness, here in the D.C. area, that went on in my lifetime. I did not, I experienced it, but I could not comprehend it. And then you think that all the radio stations, all the TV stations, all the newspapers, they all accepted advertising for this. It was different times, and it seemed to affect everybody. I mean, we recently saw in our area the Washington football team. You notice it has a new name now.
Right.
But people of all ages and backgrounds and colors, and they all supported this team at one time. So it's like, I think, as you say, it's not necessarily we're doing something wrong, but we are enhancing our sensitivities, perhaps.
That's right. That's a
improving.
wonderful way to put that. Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I got to give a lot of credit to our HR department and our upper leadership in sort of having these conversations. They really do require you to start looking at yourself individually, start looking at the company, on a company level, and start thinking about broader issues. And one of the first steps that that HR did was having this book club to center around the book White Fragility. And I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read that book, but a lot of that, what that talks about is sort of, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? It cannot be that certain groups are just shielded from having to think about racism on a broader level, or shielded from thinking about what their impact versus intentions could be. And that's something for all of us to think about, right? And these aren't easy or even, I would say, common topics at work. They haven't been, right? And for a lot of the time, it's always been, well, let's avoid this at work, right? Because it's sensitive, it's touchy. We don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to do the wrong thing. We want to support people, but we really just don't want to make anyone uncomfortable at work. But I think that what we're starting to learn, and again, a lot of credit here to the ownership and leadership groups for recognizing that, hey, these are conversations that are important. There's a need for this type of forum. We've seen it all over the country that these discussions are happening and should be happening. And for starting to, be a little bit vulnerable, start having these uncomfortable conversations so that they no longer feel uncomfortable, right? The first time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, you may be uncomfortable. It's just not something that you've been in a position to talk about before. But then once you start hearing more, you feel more comfortable, you learn more, and you gain experience and you gain understanding. And I don't think that there's anything that requires corporate groups to look into this stuff. So that's a huge credit for everyone at our company for really kind of starting that very quickly.
I'm just wondering if there's someone from another company listening to us right now that is thinking maybe we should start a similar initiative at our company. How did the members of this committee, how were they chosen, and what goes on at your meetings?
Yeah, no, good question. So the council was kind of the brainchild, I want to say, of our people operations. I call them the HR department, so everyone can kind of understand, but they're people operations. They're really there to serve the employees, and they do an excellent job at it. Kind of their brainchild, and from a lot of upper leadership and ownership recognizing, hey, we want to start centralizing and focusing and prioritizing these conversations. They're happening internally, and we just, and we know we've got some great employees who'd love to tackle some of these issues. And from that was sort of the genesis of that. And then they kind of opened it up to employees to apply. Anyone who had any interest in sort of having these conversations, had some thoughts and ideas about where we could improve or how we could improve. The makeup of the council is so important, is that it pulls in people from all different divisions, all different levels, different, sexual orientation, different religions, different races. Really, and it's just such a good microcosm of what our company is as a whole, right? We've got people from all different levels, all different departments, all different backgrounds. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I would recommend to any company is, start with the makeup of your council itself. Make sure that's inclusive. And not just inclusive in terms of color, right? Inclusive in terms of where all sorts of different backgrounds, right? We talk about disability, veteran status, class background, right? Do you have somebody on your council that grew up without parents who worked in an office? All those things, all those experiences are equally as important in creating an inclusive company. And so I think that's probably step number one. And then step number two is making sure you have that support from ownership, leadership, executives, because the success of your council hinges so much on how much support you have, because at some point you're going to ask departments or you're going to ask leadership to make certain changes, or you're going to recommend them, and really having that drive, that support, that push is going to make all the difference. And so, that is a non-issue at Van Meter. In other words, I think that there is support from all different levels. And if anything, the catalyst really was coming from the upper levels, which is quite incredible. I don't know that that's going to be the case at every organization. And to the extent that it's not, that's getting that early buy-in from upper levels is very important in making sure that the council succeeds.
I certainly have the impression myself, at being a Van Meter employee, that we don't do this because it's the right thing or the fair thing, but because at the end of the day, it'll make us a stronger and better company.
That is absolutely right. And Ernie, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly one of the things in our mission statement is we recognize that it's the right thing to do, right? It's part of our core values, but we also recognize above and beyond that it's the smart thing to do. All the research shows that diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams. And when they talk about diversity in the research, they're talking about different color, different levels, different religions, different backgrounds, because everyone thinks a little bit differently, right? And what shapes our thinking? Obviously, our natural aptitude, but also our experiences. And if you have a team where everyone has kind of the same experiences, you're not going to get the same different options, right? You're not going to get this paths forward that you otherwise would. You've got more to choose from and better decision making, right? And that comes up time and time again in the research that you're just going to outperform. And so that's a huge driving factor. And I think that's one of the narratives that the D&I Council and Van Meter wants to really help shape that, yeah, it's the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. And there is inherent value in being diverse, but there is also, quantifiable value in being diverse. And we hope that, that encourages more companies and more organizations to really think about how they're handling diversity.
Well, in about maybe 6 months or so, I'm going to invite you back on this program, and we'll kind of go through a report card and see how we're doing. How about that?
I think that sounds wonderful.
Anum, thank you so very much for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ernie.